Today we're dealing with a very, very difficult card. Coping is not the same as healing. And I say it's difficult because it's a real truth-speaking card. It's a card where we have to scratch off what's going on in the surface of things and look deeper. It's a little bit like if we imagine an infection in our body. We can keep treating the outside, or we can actually go to the cause and treat where the infection's coming from. And so this is a card of digging deep. It's a card of going into the wounds in our life and seeing what has gone on. And we need to understand that when something happens to us in our life, heartbreak, loss, difficulty, rejection, insecurity, whatever it is, we have these moments where we feel like we lose a piece of ourselves, and these difficult times in our lives. It could be as small as somebody saying something to us, or it could be as big as losing somebody we care about very deeply, or it could be about a certain experience. And certainly a lot in our childhood, our experiences with people in authority being our parents and our teachers and so on and so forth. There's these wounds, these pains, these things that get, we get cut, if we had to use that as the metaphor. And then what happens is we need to go into, some wound management at that point in time. And so we plaster it, and we look after it, and we have to stop the bleeding, and we have to deal with what's happening. And so this becomes a coping mechanism. And a coping mechanism is an initial response to pain to try and get on with things. And it's natural and it's normal. Whenever we have any kind of trauma, we have to find a part of ourselves that can deal with it. And we deal with it very well in that initial time, because we go numb. And we exit away from dealing with what the pain is about, and we just find a strategy. We find a way to cope with something. And the more we cope with it, the sort of stronger we feel. And this is the challenge, because these coping strategies become our defense mechanisms in the world, and they become the way we show up over and over and over again. And so these coping strategies keep us separate from actually healing and coming back to a place of wholeness. And so we end up performing in a way in the world. And that is why we have this card, the picture on this card, is there's a little bit of the mask that we put on to perform in the world, like the plaster that we would put on the wound. And we perform in this way. And it works. Like, we seem to be doing fine. Often these coping strategies are strategies we've come up with for independence, for strength, for success even. We've found ways to navigate life that seem to work just fine, except for the fact that every time there's a reminder of the pain, we go back to the wound. And that wound gets initiated again. And whether that happens internally or externally, there's a pain. And that pain needs to be expressed and needs to be honored and needs to be felt. And the part of us that felt it needs to be given a break, so to speak. So we need to go back to those times in our lives and reclaim and honor what would have actually helped in that moment. So if I had to give you an example like this, if I was a little girl and something happened to me, let's imagine my father left, and so I feel abandoned. I feel like it's my fault. I feel like I wasn't a good enough child. I wasn't good for him, and he left. I've come to an incorrect conclusion about his actions, but that is my pain and that is my wound. And so the coping mechanism I may come up with is to push men away, to make sure that they can't reject me, or to, go into only loving very needy men. I'm making this up, but there's 1,000 ways that this could navigate itself. But the challenge is every time there's a possibility of feeling rejected, that little girl comes back into the game, and she starts with that same story and that same wound. And so the way that we heal this is go back to, how did it feel when he left? And let's challenge the conclusions you came to. And let's notice, what is it you needed to hear or be told or be loved, so that you can give yourself a new story around this. And so I remember in my own journey, and it's still something that happens for me now, is that whenever I get triggered. I call it an activation. Something, I get reminded of something. There's this need to go into it and honor it, and be kind enough to not dismiss it, but to honor it. Also not to feed it, to go into, how do I heal this? And I remember in my own journey, in many ways, I remember seeing a statement, I think it's from Louise Hay, I can't remember, but the statement is, healing requires feeling. And so the only way we actually get to a place of healing is by feeling the pain and having a safe, sacred place to express it. Whether that be in a journal, or be with a friend, or be with a therapist, or be with a healer, or be with a coach, that can actually give a different story, so we can shift that dialogue and we can heal and recover that part of ourselves. Many people ask me, how do I know I'm healed from something? We're all going to have instances in our lives that cause us pain. It's absolutely normal, and it's part of the human experience. And so if we notice, what does healing look like? How do I know that I am healed? And the answer is when you appreciate it for exactly the way it happens. So you end up in a place of gratitude, and you're grateful for the experience in your life in exactly the way that it happened. And that gratitude comes from a sort of awareness of how you have grown and who you've become through this journey. And that gratitude cannot be done as a pretend experience. What I mean by that is, some of us just think, if I can just say, oh, well, everything happens for a reason, I'm grateful for it, I'll be fine. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about it's an ultimate experience where one day something happens and that wound is no longer activated, and you can look at it and you can say, sure, thank you so much for what happened, because now I know I am more whole, more expanded, so on and so forth. I have said this before, and I will say it again, that pain is not the only way to grow. There are many other ways to grow in life, so we don't need to get attached to our pain. But where there is pain, we do need to honor it with compassion and kindness and gentleness. So the exercise I would offer you today is to sit down and notice, where in your life is there something that keeps getting triggered, something that keeps getting activated? And to go into, where did it initiate? And you can ask yourself this very simple question: how old do I feel when this happens? And there will be something aligned at that age that will remind you of something that happened in your life at that point in time. And then you can go and have a dialogue with that part of you. Imagine it's the 18-year-old version of you, or the 5-year-old version of you, or the yesterday version of you. And you can have a dialogue and say, what do you need? If I could offer you words of comfort, if I could offer you a perspective, what is it that you need me to say to you? Sending you lots of love as you experience your healing journey.
Get your very own deck of I Am Lightwalker cards straight from Taryn by visiting IamLightwalker.com/cards.